Hi guys, in this video I'm going to go over multidimensional arrays. In the example that I'm going to use, I create an array of 2 dimensions of characters, and before I start to declare the actual array, let me declare a couple of constants. The first constant will serve as the first dimension, which I call rows, and I want to have 3 rows, and the next dimension I use columns, and this I want to have 5 columns. So these are the 2 dimensions. Next I create the actual array. I call this array letters, and let me start out by just a single dimension. Let's say I have rows. This would just be a regular array. Just I happen to call it rows. I could call it length, size, whatever I want to call my constant. That serve as the number of elements. Now for each dimension I want to add, I just add another set of brackets with a size inside. So for example, 5, 3, 2, 8. These are all dimensions. I could go on and on and on, as many dimensions as I want to add. There's really no limit to it. So here I would have 1 dimension, another dimension of 5 elements, then 3, 2, and 7. In this case, I want to keep it 2-dimensional, so I have just 2 set of brackets. And instead of hard coding the size right there, I use my constant columns. So the 2 dimensions here, I could draw out, and I do this right here. The first one are the rows. I have 3 rows, and I draw this vertical. So 0, 1, and 2 would be the index. And then above, I have the columns. So this will go horizontally. So I have column 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, less than the size, less than columns. And now inside, this is all uninitialized. I haven't really specified what I put in there. And the last one too. So this is kind of what my array looks like at this point. Now what I want to do is I want to initialize it to A, B, C, D, E, and the next one I continue F, G, and so on. So I use the alphabetical order of letters that I want to initialize it. So the first thing that I do is I use a loop starting with row 0, row less than my constant, and then row plus plus. So what this will do is, remember my rows are vertical here. I start with row 0, which is just an integer, and then row 1, row 2, less than the rows, so less than 3, and then we would stop. So essentially I just create an integer from 0, 1, and 2. Now each time that I have this integer, I want to iterate over the rows. So when my row integer here is 0, I want to generate 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what I have, and then for when my integer is 1, I want to do the same thing. 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So since I want to do it every time, I add another nested loop inside. And I use the C for column, C less than my columns, and C plus plus. So what this loop will conceptually do is go over the rows. This is vertical. And then for each row, it will go over the columns horizontally. So when row is 0, all the columns. When row is 1, again, another loop, all the columns. Then when I increment row by 1, row would now be 2. So we would be here. The inner loop will again generate all the integers for the columns, so 0 to 4. Then at the end of that, row will be 3, and I would stop. So what I want to do here is I want to initialize the letter to the alphabet. So let me create a variable above called letter, and I initialize this to character A, so character single quotes. And then I access my array, which is called letters at index row. So remember now I accessed it at the first dimension. So I no longer have a 2-dimensional array, I have a single-dimensional array. And the array that I'm specifying is at index 0, since I just started with 0. Now, which element do I want to initialize with? Or with, and the index, the element is specified by my index here. So I just add bracket C. So the first one here, just the letters, brackets R, just defines is it this array, or this array. Or in other words, which row am I targeting? Now once I know the exact row, then I can say with the next dimension, which element in that row am I targeting? Or which element in that array am I targeting? Now I want to start out with the letter A, so I just assign A here. This starts 0, 0, will assign letter A, and now it will increment C by 1, so C will be 1, R is still 0, so it will be 0 and 1. If I look 0 and 1, it would update this. So the first one, it will update this, then it will increment C by 1. So row stays the same. So I have now row R 0, C 1, and I want to initialize this to B. So what I have to do here is just increment my letter. Since letters are stored in order, by incrementing this variable, I will automatically get B. Now I assign B, now I increment it again. This will result in C. It will increment the variable C. So remember, C was 1, C is now 2, and then I store C here. C will be incremented to D. The letter will be incremented, the letter C will be incremented to D, and then the variable C will be incremented to 3. So this will be D. Then letter will be incremented to E, and the C variable in the loop will be incremented to 4. Now the letter will be incremented to F. C will be incremented to 5. 5 is not less than columns, so this loop ends. And when we see at the end of the inner loop, it'll just go to the outer loop, increment R by 1, and then R is 1, which is still less than rows, and we do the same thing again. So this will be F, then G, H, and so on. So we'll fill out the entire array. So H, I, J. This will end the inner loop again. So I'll go to the outer loop. R will now be 2, and then this will be J, K, L, M, N, and O. So let's do another loop to output whatever we store. So I use again for int R equals 0, R less than rows, R plus plus. And here I will do the C starting at 0, C less than columns, C plus plus. So outer one again goes over the rows, the inner one goes over the columns. And each time I output the array at R and second dimension at C. And when I'm done outputting each character, now if I did it like this, I would get a single row. So I can actually run it. And you will see I never put a line break, so I'll just do A, B, C, D, E, F, G until O. But what I want to do is when I'm done with my inner loop here, with my inner array, essentially, I want to put a line break. So I don't want to put that inside here, because if I did this, I would do it after every single character. So if I did this, you would see they will just print vertically. I actually want to output it at the end of the second dimension or the inner array. So since I would do it at the end, when did I reach my end? When my loop is done. So I remove this here, put it after the loop. And running this, you'll see now we get the nice output like it is stored in the array. So this is one way. I did it with a loop, but just to give you another example, I could also do character, I call this letters 2, rows, columns, I could also initialize it like this: A, B, C, D, and E, comma, and then another one, F, G, H, I, J, and then the last row, which would be K, L, M, N, and O, and then the semicolon. So this is really the same like I discussed in another video. We initialize it right in place, but since we have two dimensions, the outer list here that starts here and here has just arrays, and the arrays in itself, there are 3 of them, 1, 2, and 3. And this array in itself I initialize with a list. That's why I have the list here. So it looks maybe at a first glance kind of complicated, but essentially it's the exact same concept. I just have one list, the outer list is of arrays, and then the inner one is an array of character. So this would be another way of initializing it instead of using the two nested loops. All right, thank you for watching.